to segue to our demo, so there are two ways, or at least three ways to send up data to CALPADS. Number one is through batch file, wherein you upload or extract all the necessary batch files from your SIS and upload it to CALPADS. And this is normally for your enrollment, your SINF, your SPRG, your SELA. And then you also have the online maintenance, which is essentially reporting one student at a time by posting the records manually online in the CALPADS user interface. And this is what I will be demonstrating today. Okay. The third option for you to upload data pertains to your SPED data, right? Your student with disabilities data, the 4 files that CALPADS will expect you to send up. Those files are stored in your special education data system, and all transactions that you create in that system gets pushed to CALPADS. Once you click on that push button, then it will transmit the data to CALPADS en masse, meaning it will push any active records that the system thinks should be reported to CALPADS. It gets pushed automatically. So those are the 3 ways to send up data to CALPADS, either to add records, to edit records, and to delete records, right? So the online maintenance process is a little bit cumbersome because you will have to wait for the page to open up. You will need to wait for the system to verify that you have posted the records. But this is necessary, especially during the end of the submission period, during the certification window where you are just trying to update just minor records for specific students, okay? Rather than resubmitting the entire school's batch file or your entire districts, you just have to manually post records and make corrections in online maintenance. That way it doesn't alter existing records in CALPADS. So with that, let's move on to the demonstration. So I have here a set of stories, right? I have 2 students. First one is Muir Woods, and the second one is Cabrillo, right? So these are based on the cumulative file. These students are born out of the country. They're both gender, and essentially I have the different information that I need to encode in CALPADS, right? So let's do that. Let's first start with Muir Woods. So Muir Woods was born on 10/2/2018 in the UK. He is a child of US Air Force serviceman. So essentially the parent was assigned in the UK. The student was born there. So essentially they were born in that country. So what does that mean? The student is foreign born regardless if their parents are US citizens, right? So let's start with this kid. So to add a new record, go to online maintenance and student data. Okay. You can do student data, or I prefer online maintenance and request SSID. So if you do student data, if you just click on this, you'll have to go here to search by demographics and click on request SSID. If this is a new student, I would rather go to request SSID because there are more parameters that you could put. That way the system can filter if there are any matches in CALPADS, right? So let's do that. So request SSID. I copy the first name. When you do copy paste, make sure that you don't include the spaces between those names, because otherwise CALPADS will include that space and you'll end up wondering down the road why you can search for that student or how come the student has it is difficult to be searched because there's a space at the end, and then also it might impact how you update your data later on. If you're trying to update the SINF, the names might be different, right? Because there's a space. So second is date of birth, 10/2/2018. Since the student was born in 2018, what's the grade level of this student? 2018, 18. So the student was born on 10/2/2018. So that makes him 5 years old on October 2nd. October 2, 2018. Okay. And so based on the rules that we have, that student could be a TK student, right? So how do I know this? So there are different reference materials that you have to have beside you or handy whenever you try to add records to CALPADS or submit data to CALPADS. Those documentation can be downloaded from the CALPADS user manual. You can go to help, you can go to the user manual here or system documentation. This link here, the system documentation, should bring you to the CALPADS page, and you could download the documentation here. However, sometimes there is a delay when CD updates this. So I would rather have you go to the user manual, okay, and then go to resource, and then go to references. As you can see, there is also the batch templates here, which I will discuss in once we do some demos. Okay. So let me just increase the screen here. So you have here the CALPADS file specifications. You have the code sets, which list all of the possible codes that you could use. You have the file specifications Word document and the CALPADS file specifications spreadsheet version of this Word document. And then you have your CALPADS valid code combinations. And then you also have the CALPADS SSID enrollment procedures. This is an old file, but sometimes it is still useful, especially when you are dealing with enrollment type anomalies or any checking on any rules regarding what enrollment to use. And then, of course, you have your reporting data for student disabilities. If you are the CALPADS person, you are responsible in setting up their enrollment properly. So this is a good documentation you could refer to in terms of who gets to report who, and then what type of enrollment should be reported for those students. Okay, so these are just some of those documentation that you could download from the CALPADS reference site. There is also the CALPADS known issues list, which tells you if there is a problem with something that, if there is a related problem to the work that you are trying to do in CALPADS. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to this. So I have my CALPADS code sets document open. Okay, so you can see, it says here that TK is a grade level for, you use TK if the student is based on this definition. So essentially, TK is if the student is still age 4, but will turn 5 on between September 2nd up to December 2nd of this year. So another documentation that you should have handy would be the CALPADS Flash documentation, because that was discussed in the Flash, and I believe it's in the slides that we presented. So that would go back to the system documentation here. Let's go back to this. Go to communications, and it should provide you the guidance on TK reporting. Okay, that's CalPads Flash 257. If someone could post it here on the chat box, that would be fine. So it says here in 23-24, students are eligible for TK if they turn 5 between September 2nd and April 2nd. So our student will be turning 5 on October 2nd. So that would make him a TK student, right? And so let's first populate the information that we have based on this. So I would say just pick gender and birth date, and let's see if there are any potential matches here. The system found 5 results. Okay, so the system found Malachi Woods, Mateo Woods, Woods. So looking at this and looking at the birthdays, I don't see a potential match. So there are different ways to determine what if a match is present, right? Number one is obviously the student's name, the birth date, and then if all matches, you also have to look at the guardian first and last name. So if that if there are no matches, then you can go ahead and just proceed and create a new SSID. Now, if you want to continue to do some investigation, so let's say all of this information matches except for the parent guardian, because what this record did not have this populated, and the reporting LEA is your neighboring LEA, then you could probably reach out to them and see if, or you could even go back here and look at further demographic records, right? So you can do that. Okay. However, I'm pretty sure that this is a new student and none of this matches. So let's just create a new SSID. Click yes. And we now have the new SSID enrollment section. So let me just go back to the file and report all other necessary information we have. So the student is TK because the student will turn 5 between 9/2 and April 2nd this year. So let's add the TK. Grade level would be TK. So you need to scroll to be able to see the transitional kindergarten option here at the bottom. And then of course, we'll have to go back here. So you have your first name, middle name, gender, birth date. If you have a middle name, this is the chance for you to add it in. And then the birth country is United Kingdom. So United Kingdom is GB for Great Britain. Birth state, I'm not sure what the birth state is, but it says here Dunbar, UK. So let's do Dunbar, UK here for the birth city. Okay. Are there any preferred names? I don't have that information. And now we go to the reporting LEA. By default, it will show your LEA here. And so now you just have to pick your school of attendance. Okay. So for the school of attendance, I selected Emerson Elementary. And then the local student ID would be any student ID generated in your SIS. So let's just say 2023 123 012. Okay. The enrollment start date, the student enrolled on 9/11 because they just moved back from the UK. So the parent is now deployed back here in California, probably Travis Air Force Base, but that's a long drive for the dad. So let's go do enrollment 9/11. Enrollment exit date should be blank. School code, all of these are not necessary at this time. And so we click on post. All right. So now it says that the posting was successful, or at least the process was successful. So I click on file submission detail and look at my status right now. So rather than wait for this to show staging or post or posted, I'll just go and create the second student's SSID record right now. So let's go to CAB Rio. So again, we go to request SSID and populate the necessary fields. So CAB and Rio. So uh, and make sure there are no blank spaces. Gender is male. Birth date is August 3, 2018. And birth country is Spain. Let's just leave that blank first. So you need to have a minimum of 3 elements for the system to allow a search. So I had 4. So let's do a search here. And this is easy. They doesn't have a matching SSID. So if you are sure that the student just moved, migrated from a different country, then you can be confident to create a new SSID. Now, if you are one of those CalPads admins who want to, try another set of search, I can just probably take out the gender and do a search again. Okay, I guess there's no match still. So I can confidently say that this student has never been in California or studied in any California school. So I'll click on create a new SSID and populate the other fields that we can add in here. So we have birth country is Spain. España. Birth state, I'm not sure, but it says the birth city is Palma del Rio. So here, and then we don't have a preferred name, alias name. So the preferred first and last names, this would sometimes be if a student has a preferred name. There are SIS that have this field populated. Whether or not the student wants you to send it up as well or not is something that you guys need to be aware of. Okay, so you can just go update or add the preferred last name or first name. The SIS probably have notes in there, whether or not if the student wants it to be transmitted to CalPads as well. So that I don't have that information. So we move on to the school of attendance. So again, this is Emerson Elementary. Local student ID would be 2023 962. Okay, we have that. So for those of you who are reporting TKs or KN students and moving from one system to another, or if your system has a tendency to recycle local student IDs, uh, it is important to be aware of that because the local student ID is used to determine any matching, or in CalPAS, it will also be used for any validation. So if I have a TK student and that student has this student ID, a- and it turns out this student ID was recycled uh, and was used by a student, let's say 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and your system tends to recycle student IDs, CalPAS will tend to associate this to the SSID for that old record, for that old student. So you might end up getting SCNR 0622 or 23, which involves the TK grade level. So if you have a TK student and you're using this, and this student had a grade level like 12 or 11, then tendency is you might potentially get the SENR 0622 or 23. I'm not particularly confident on what SSID validation error, but it will trigger an error saying you can't use a TK for this student, even though this student obviously is a KN or a TK student, right? Based on the age. So always be aware that you cannot recycle local student IDs. All right, so enrollment status, we have a 10. Grade level is a KN because the student is 5. He turned 5 on August 3. The enrollment start date is, of course, 9/11 again. So we don't need to populate the exit date, student exit reason, completion. All of these are NOV related. Now, if a student is a SPED student or has a inter-transfer agreement, in, then you probably may have to populate the district of geographic residence. However, we don't. This is not applicable to this student, so we move on. We click on post, and we allow the system to post the record. So my question now is, how do we end up finding the SSIDs generated for these students? So we have posted those records in. How can we generate those SSIDs? Okay, search by using demographics. That's one way. Search by downloading the SSID extract. Those are those two answers are correct. So we can manually search for students by going to student data and then search by demographics. And we had Muir Woods. And true enough, we were able to generate the SSID, right? So now, what would you do with this? So you go here to Muir Woods, click this, and copy the SSID generated and send it into your SIS, right? And since you're already here, you can also create all of the necessary Fall 1 records as well for the student. So that's one way to do it, right? The other way is through the SSID extract. The SSID extract, let's say if you continue to request SSIDs throughout the day, so you had probably generated 50 of them, and so it would be cumbersome for you to be just looking at each SSID and searching for their potential generated SSIDs. So the second answer, which is the SSID extract, is a better option for you. We go to extracts. To download the extract, you go to extracts here. and we clicked on SSID extract. Okay, let me check if our view submission already posted the SSIDs for, one was rejected. Okay, so let's look at this record first before we do the SSID extract. So it says here that the SCNR was rejected for the student. I wonder why. So what did I do here? I always have the view submission window open alongside the SSID posting page. That way you can see what the status of your request is right away, rather than go back and then wonder why the SSID wasn't generated for the student. Okay, so it says rejected. So let's address this for now. And it says if grade level is equal to KN, then student age between 4 and 7 years is inclusive. Note, if the student is 7 years and 9 months, the student is considered to be age 7. So this was the error that I was referring to earlier. So let's click on view. So August 3, 2023, and the student started on 9/11. So the student should already have been 5 at this time. Is that correct? By 9/11. Yeah. Good catch, Rebecca. Yes, the student birth date is 8/3/2023 instead of 2018. That's a good catch. So we go back, since now that it generated an SSID, which is interesting, I copy this and let's see if it would generate it. So we go to online maintenance, we go to student data, and let's see if it would bring up the student's enrollment record that we generated. Okay, it says record not found. So how can we bring this up if the student has no, I mean, it already generated the SSID. However, we can go into the details. The workaround on that is, since the student, since each student detail page has its own URL, you can just copy the SSID and then just change this part here. Okay. So you have the website, the student section, and then the student detail, which is the SSID. So let's try that. And here we go. So we have here 8/3/2023 as that birth date, right? Unfortunately, CALPADS didn't create the enrollment because it rejected, but for some reason, the system generated the SSID. So now we have to add back the correct enrollment record. So we click on add new enrollment or add new record. Yes, that was nifty. That's why you guys should be attending the data population sessions. Just kidding. Okay, so let's again add the school of attendance. And then the student ID was, let's just copy. I guess the only problem now is we didn't, it was this one. Okay. Okay, so we have here KN and then enrollment start date was 9/11. I know where the issue is. So you have 9/11, right? Let's try to post this. I guess this will error out because we use a 2023 birth date, which is like a week ago. So essentially, the only record that might, grade level that might work for this would be the infant grade level, right? But let's try adding this record in and let's see if it would trigger again, trigger an error again. And let's go to demographics. So here it says A323, right? This is where you can only report or update student's birth date. However, since we don't have the enrollment, we don't have ownership of this record. So that's why, let's just try this. (2018). See, I can't post this because I don't have ownership of the record right now because the SENR was not populated. So my bet is this will trigger an error. Okay, let's go back to our view submission and click on that record again. So this is the reason why it's important for you to populate the records correctly, right? So again, it was rejected. And again, we will have this SCNR 262 or 622 error. 262. So I was able to figure it out based on the message itself, right? However, if the message is too cryptic for you, you can click on this link here, the SENR 262, which would bring up the user manual version of your CALPADS error list. So again, it looks at the fields validated, the birth date, grade level, and enrollment start date. Okay, it says here, obviously our birth date was incorrect, so we know what the error is. So a workaround on that would be just to gain ownership of the record is get the SSID. Let's go back to the page, student data. Okay, and then I add a dash and this. So a workaround here, my strategy is to report a grade level of infant for now. Okay. The only way to gain ownership for this student is report a grade level of infant matching the 9/11 effective start date. So let's do that. Add new record. Emerson Elementary. Grade level is KN. Enrollment was, let's just add an earlier enrollment. The enrollment was, the birth date is 8/3. So let's just add a 9/10 enrollment. Okay, let's just do a 9/10 enrollment and delete that SINF later on. So let's just do a 9 for enrollment. Exit date, leave it blank. Infant, almost did it again. Student ID is 62 and then post. Enrollment status 10, invalid for status grade level infant TD. All right then, so let's change the enrollment to 20.
Hey, Kai.
Yes?
Infants, I think, can only be 50.
50? Okay.
Yeah. And if I can make another suggestion here, just because the enrollment start date is a primary key, CalPADS won't let you just change the start date. So my recommendation would be to, even though this is the dummy, just to
Mm-hmm.
use the actual start date, because
Mm-hmm.
then when you go and change the date of birth, then all you have to do then is on the enrollment, just change the grade level instead of having to
Delete.
no show, delete,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
add another one.
yeah. That's a good point. Okay, it's now staging, and hopefully we get through this student's record. It's validating. Okay, this is what happens when you're too anxious to have this record posted. It's like watching if your bid for eBay went through, right? Posting. That's a positive note. Posting. Okay, let's move on. It's now posting. So we're assuming that this record will post. And so, true enough, the record posted. So again, we go to the SSID that was just generated. Just I'm just going here just so I can copy the SSID. And now, if you just do student detail, you search for the student, you should now be able to search it with the matching info. Okay, so we now have the enrollment. Now it's just a matter of making the corrections here, which I would do once we generate the extract. Okay, so my apologies for a little bit sidetrack, but again, this is just an extra demo for you because in real life you will encounter this one way or not or another. So lesson learned, always make sure before posting a record to make sure all of the information are correct, right? So let's just correct this first to infant. So we now have ownership of this. I wonder if this will create an error for us. Change the birth date to 2018 and post. Ah, okay. So let's move on to this later. So So that's a way to just request the SSID, right? Now you have to populate all of the information. So again, the SSID was created. Let's go to the extract to just generate that information for all your students, right? Let's just close all of these unnecessary sections here and go to the extract. So when you request an SSID extract, click on this, go to extracts, click on SSID extract. And then you have the option to pick by date range or pick by enrollment. Since let's say you've been just piling up your SSID requests, I prefer you pick date range by enrollment because you probably may have requested yesterday or a day before. So you have two options here. If you are sure of when the SSIDs were created, you can just pick this option, add all of the schools involved, do the SSID create date, which is obviously today, or let's just do one day before because you can do an SSID end date that matches the start date. Okay. And then make sure you have the grade level. So this is also a way for you to be able to filter the SSID extract. So if you just want to pick up all of those TK and KN and infant, then you just select the grade levels. Okay. Then you can request file. And then for demo purposes, we will also extract based on enrollment date. So if you're using the enrollment date, I would rather you use the expected first day of school. Okay. So if you are sure that the students enrolled, last week or 2 weeks ago, then just use that option. So let's just do September 1. So you have here all of the schools. you selected the enrollment start date, pick today's date for the enrollment end date. You also have the option to click on most recent enrollment, but this will just only be if you have multiple enrollments for a student within your district. Okay? And then again, we can deselect all, just pick the grade levels that we requested. Infant, PS, TK. Okay? And then request file. Or if you've requested SSIDs for multiple grade levels, just pick all of it if you're not sure. Okay? Request file, and we will have that information handy in a minute here. So when we use request SSID by files by create date, it generated no record for us. So we will have to wait for this other request to go through and see if we have any other students we've requested so far. Okay. Okay. So let's say you want to upload this information en masse to your SIS. Then let's just wait for this to download. Hopefully the system is quick enough. Okay. So now that we have the SSIDs generated, let's focus on the demographic information and any other potential data that we have to report. So we have here programs, we have here their SELA record, their race and ethnicity, the parents, and that also goes the same here. So we now have this, right? So I download the SSID extract. And the extract, once you download the extract, you can just get the file and directly import it into your SIS. Okay. And the benefit of using an SSID extract instead of just going to demographic information is because of the other goodies that you will see in this extract. So right now we only have a text file, but if we go to the CALPADS user manual, just go again to the user manual here. So we have the home page here. Go to resource, go to batch file templates, and then go to extract templates here. You have the SSID extract template. Okay. If you download that, it would give you a spreadsheet with the columns provided. Okay. So for now, the SSID extract is preventing me to import it because of some macro that is deemed a security risk. So what I would do is just instead of clicking on this and triggering the macro, I will just go here to the first section here under this field and then do data, get data, and then convert the file into Excel. Okay. So I go to the download section. And I have the SSID extract. So this is caret delimited. Next. And now I have the extract presented in a more useful version, right? So I have all of those enrollments. I requested SSIDs for since last week. And then the SSID create dates. And then look here. So I have some students who I requested based on their grade level, and this student came from a different district. So I can see their current ELA status already. I can see their language. Okay. All of this English language, start date, whether or not the student is SPED or not. Although this section here, you may want to look at this with a grain of salt because there is an issue right now in the CALPADS extract wherein it doesn't accurately tell us if a student is a SPED or not. Okay, so you have to check if you are sure that this student, I have a student here. The only reason why I know this is I have a student who is a SPED student and it's showing on the extract that this student is an N. So if you have this, either send in a ticket or if you know where to look at, you could look at the CALPADS known issues list. You could go here to the website, go to help, current known issues, or there's a quick link at the bottom of CALPADS. If you click on this, it should bring you to the fixed and known issues list. All right. So I have here an issue regarding the ODS extract. See, it says, oh, the SSID extract. SSID extract populating N for active student with disability. So that's the issue I have with that. But that's not the thing we're focusing on right now. So let's just see the benefits of having this. So you have all of this other information that you could upload into your SIS, and your SIS will then pick those info and populate the fields within the SIS. That way, when you request the SINF extract and upload to CALPADS, if you're doing a batch file upload, all of those fields are generated. Okay. So another thing is the SELA here. So that way, you don't have to determine if you need to submit a SELA record of the student or not, right? So that's just the benefit of using the SSID extract. Although you can do the online search by student demographic, however, the extract would still be the way to go. All right, so we've done the SSID generation. Obviously, there's just one file, right? But let's now move on to the next record, which is the SINF. So for this student, let's just start with Cabrillo since we're fixing some stuff here. So for the student has now the enrollment and a demographic record. However, this is just a shell record right now. When I mean shell record, this is just the elements that was auto-generated by the system when we enroll the student in CALPADS, right? We still have the dates and then the last name. However, there are some elements here that we still need to populate. Failure to do that would then trigger potential CDDs, which is the data discrepancy errors, or certification. Actually, all certification errors will be CDDs. So down the road, when the snapshot is activated for fall 1, you will end up getting those missing race and ethnicity and missing this information here, assuming the system validates for those records. Okay, so let's first add the demographic info, right? So now the student's birth date was incorrectly done, right? So now is our time to be able to check that birth date, to correct the birth date, right? So the birth date is 2018, enrolled in school US less than 3 years cumulative indicator. What does this mean? Well, this means that you need to populate this if the student is enrolled is foreign born, right? And how do I know that? By going to the CALPADS filed specifications form. So again, that document can be downloaded in the from the CALPADS user manual or in the CDE system page. Okay. So the CALPADS file specifications just provides you guidance when a field is required or not, and some business rules when you populate it, and it also has the potential code sets you could pick from. pick from the CalPADS code sets document. So we're looking for the 3-year cumulative enrollment. So we just scroll down here at the bottom and look for it or filter using its name, right? So either way, you can do that. So right now, we go to student information and we have here enrolled in US school less than 3 years cumulative. It's an indication whether or not a student has been enrolled in the US for less than 3 years. Okay, the student is enrolled less than 3 years. So is this a Y? I'll have to double check what else are indicated in the CFS. So when is this field required? So we scroll to the right. Oh, scroll too much. And it says here it is required if the student is born outside of the US or Puerto Rico, or if the country code is UU. So essentially, if you had a country code not equal to US, Puerto Rico, or UU, or if it's blank, then you have to populate it with a Y. So that's what we're going to do, right? We have to populate this with a Y because the student was born in Spain. Okay. And then initial US enrollment date. Is this required? Possibly. So let's look at this again. So let's go back to the CalPADS file specifications. It says here, student initial US enrollment date K to 12. Okay. So it is required if the student is EL and if the grade level is K to 12 and the student age is at least 4 years. So right now, we're still correcting the birth date of this. So we probably have to just skip this for now because we're trying to correct the birth date of this student, right? So let's see if that will work. And then you have here Hispanic ethnicity indicator. Yes, the student is Hispanic, obviously. He's from the motherland, I guess. So yes, race code missing indicator is no. Ethnicity missing indicator is a no, and this student is white because white is anyone with a European descent. Okay. Now we have the parent guardian ed level for this student. So we will go back to our cumulative info. So the parent is Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo. Okay. Ooh, sounds familiar. First name. Then guardian last name. Okay. And then parent guardian ed level is decline to state. Right. Decline to state. So what does this mean when it's declined to state? Will the parent be eligible for socioeconomically disadvantaged status? That's right. No. All right. So let's move on to his address. So street is okay. 1800 Cabrillo Memorial Drive. So let's look at that. So we have here residential address and mailing address. So why are there two addresses here? So this is important when you have two different addresses that the student has populated, right? If they have a different mailing address, then by all means populate that too, because what that means is that if the student has two different addresses, the CDE or any state system will then use the mailing address to send information to the parents, right? Like LPAC testing, CASP testing, and if you're a PEBT, all of those other good stuff, it goes through the mailing address. So if these two are different, then please populate the mailing address. So let's Pick up this, and then let's say Berkeley. State is California. Okay. Zip code is, that's the zip code for this kid, 94701. I don't have a different mailing address, so I'll just click on post. And let's see if the system will allow us to post the record. So again, it says posted. So let's go back to view submissions, or you can just right click on this or do control on your keyboard and click on this, and it should bring up a different page here. It is staging. And let's cross our fingers that this student information goes through it with no issues. Staged. Okay. So now our next step is to populate their SELA record if this student does not have a SELA record yet. So we have here Spanish as the home language survey language. And then you have, yeah, we have this. So let's work on that. Hopefully it's posting. Okay, it's promising. Posted. So now we go back here and we refresh our page. And now we have the necessary information here, right? So now we now have to submit the ELAS record of the student. But wait a minute, can you submit a SELA record for a 50? That's right. So because we did an error earlier, we have to backtrack and make sure we update the enrollment record first before submitting the SELA record, right? So because we want the student to be tested, and so we need to submit the TBD for the student because the home language survey says the student is Spanish. However, we can't do that with a 50. So now we have to backtrack and change the enrollment, okay? We can't change this outright. Let's see if we could do that. 50 infant. I guess we could do that now. However, the date, now we can't. Okay. So let's just do this. We're correcting two areas here. The enrollment status and the start date. Since we had the start date of 9/11, we have to create a new record and then delete this afterwards. So we'll first have to exit the student on nine ten for CALPADS purposes. So let's just do an E117. So again, I had to avoid any errors, you also have to know what exit codes are appropriate to the enrollment status. Okay, so E170 should be fine for the student. So I click on post. Okay. So this is the problem again when you don't do your records correctly the first time, because we get to backtrack a little bit. But I guess this would benefit you guys. I hope. All right. It's staged and posted, I hope. Validating. Okay. Okay. Posting. Posted. Okay. So let's refresh. So now we have exited this enrollment. Now we create the new enrollment, that the real enrollment, which was 9/11, right? That way it matches this demographic record. So we do that. We add a new record. We do the school of attendance as Emerson. Local student ID is this. And then primary grade level was kinder. Start date was 9/11. Okay, let's make sure everything is correct here. And then post. Okay, let's go back to here. Standardized. This would be a best time to have some background music, Marshall. Jeopardy. The anticipation.
That's right.
All right, so it's validating. And okay, validating still. Validated. Okay, let's refresh this. There we go. 9/11. So we have the correct enrollment that we should have had to begin with the correct demographic record. So now we can just delete this and be done with that record, dummy record. And that took us forever. But I mean, you guys would benefit from that. So now we just requested that, but we don't need to wait for this to do our next step because this is just a deletion anyway. This is much more important than 9/11/2023. So we now move on to the student English language acquisition, right? So the student home language survey says the student is speaking Spanish at home. So all 4 questions, or I believe 3 questions, show Spanish. So let's use that. English language acquisition start date is 9/11. TBD. And since this is a TBD and this is only the first record, we're not correcting anything. So this field, the SELA correction code, should be left blank. Now for primary language, for those seasoned CALPADS users, it would, it's annoying right now to look for Spanish at the tail end of this list because before Spanish is at the top of the list, right? So however, we have to make do with it. So we now have Spanish, Castilian, okay? Okay, and then we click on post. All right, so while that is posting, let's move on to the student program. So we now have the enrollment, the demographics, the address, the SELA. Now we go to programs. What are the programs that the student is eligible in, right? So based on the programs, the student qualified for NSLP, meaning based on the income. And then obviously the student is Title III eligible immigrant. How were we able to generate this? So it's not in the cumulative file, but I am just essentially deriving this from the student information that the student provided. So we have the forms. However, the Title III eligible immigrant, it's based on the form. So it's based on whether or not the student is foreign born and if the initial US enrollment date is populated or the enrolled in US cumulative enrollment is a yes. Okay, so this is the only record I can populate. This will be derived from the information we populated so far. Okay, so let's add a program record. So essentially, once a student enrolled last week, they submitted the form, and my district was able to investigate, research, and deem the student eligible for NSLP this week. And so we picked program 181. There you go. The membership start date is based on when the form was filled out, was populated, and so they enrolled on 9/11. However, we got the form back 9/13 with all of the information in. So I have 9/13 here. Okay. So all of this other information are not relevant to this free meal program 181. Why? And how did I derive that from? It's based on, again, the CALPADS CFS form. If you go to student program and look at all of these other fields, you'll see that this is not required for a 181. Okay. So I click on post, and we now have the record hopefully posting. So let's refresh the screen and see if the SELA record was posted. So I have a question. Since this student is TBD, what other information from the demographic information has to be populated just in case? That is correct. It's the initial enrollment date. How did we determine that? Again, we go back to the CALPADS file specifications and go to this. It says here, if the student, this must be populated if the student is turned out to be EL later on. Okay. So since the student has an HLS of Spanish and a TBD, so potentially this student will need to be tested. So regardless if this is the student ends up in an initial IFEP, initial fluent, or an EL, it would be beneficial for you to just populate this field anyway, just in case. That way you don't need to correct this down the road when you're in a rush to certify, because you'll get all of this missing initial US enrollment date for an EL student error. Okay, so you can do this now. Just add the initial US enrollment date, and the initial US enrollment date would be, of course, 9/11. Okay, 9/11. The reason why we're backtracking is because we didn't have this, we didn't report the birth date correctly. So imagine all of the work that we had to do just because we miss out on that information the first time, right? Okay, so we don't have to wait for this to be populated. Let's move on to the next student, right? So we've covered this part here. The student is Hispanic. We have covered the SELA. Now the student is determined to be Title III eligible and the NSLP. And we've covered the student's birth dates. So all of these are good to go. So potentially this student won't be part of the SED based on the current definition of the SED, right? So let's move back to Muir Woods. So now that we have Muir Woods, we can just go back and search doing the demographic search, or we can just go back to the extract. Where's our extract here? This is also a good way why you need an extract. That way you have a whole list of new students in a spreadsheet, right? So we have here Muir Woods. Okay, let's copy this student and search. And we have, yes, that's correct. You can use the US initial enrollment date if available. So now you have the student enrollment here, right? We have TK 9/11. Now again, since we created this enrollment with less information, we now have to create the or populate the required fields, right? Because this is just a shell SINF right now. Again, here's another thing. When you submit your enrollments 9/11 and you create your demographic record, always make sure that the effective start date matches the enrollment start date. Because otherwise, if you have a date that is after 9/11, let's say you have a 9/15, if you submit your SINF with the 9/15, because sometimes if you extract the SINF file from your SIS, and sometimes for some reason the effective start date is based on when you extracted the file, chances are CalPAS will create another record here and will leave this with empty fields. So always make sure that when you extract your SINF file, at least at the start of the year, it should always match the effective start date. That way you don't have to go back and worry about any other shell records that you missed their ethnicity and other information here. Okay, so let's go back to this demographic info. So now we have Muir Woods. Again, we had Dunbar. We had, okay, birth date. Okay, we have most of that information. So now the student is uh, foreign born, right? So this should be a yes. And then even though the student appears to be EO because he's English speaking, then it doesn't hurt to populate the initial US enrollment date as well. However, you have the option not to, but it won't hurt if you populate that too. Okay. The only problem when this would occur would be if you have this missing and you have an EL down the road. Okay. So ethnicity and race. Hispanic, no. Race code missing indicator is no. Ethnicity missing indicator is no. Race code is white. Okay. Parent guardian. So the parent are both not high school graduates. Okay. So what does that mean? Okay. So we have both parents here. Yes, that's right. They are both SED. Or the student is SED. Okay. Parent guardian, first name. Okay, so I copy this, cut it, not high school graduate, cut, paste, not high school graduate. Residential address. So 1 Muir Woods Road. Okay. Berkeley. I'm glad it's in Berkeley. Because if you have 1 Muir Roads and you end up in Mill Valley, you'll end up in the forest, if you know what I mean. Berkeley, residential state, California. All right. So we don't have a mailing address. So we post this. Okay, let's double check. We won't need to backtrack. Okay, 10 to 2018, Dunbar, ethnicity. All right, post. Oh, did it say decline to state? Let me double check. Oh yeah, you're right. Good catch. Decline to state. Okay, well, we'll have to correct that then. Okay. So let's do that after we report the other records. So let's go to the SELA. Just take a note. We need to update the decline to state on that. So let's go to SELA. So the student is EO. So we add an EO, 9/11, Enrollment start date, English language status code is EO, language is English. Okay, and post. Okay, and then the fourth is, oh, not this one. Where's my other cheat sheet here? So we now have the student. Turns out the student is homeless, and the student is also Title III because of the enrolled 3 years indicator. Why? And then the student is in the Air Force. So what does this mean? So essentially, the parent was sent back to the US, right? Probably the parent, because he didn't want to drive that far, the parent is stationed in Travis Air Force Base, I guess. But then they have a relative in Berkeley. And so potentially this student is homeless because they're doubling in, right? Sometimes, just because the student is sharing a house with a relative, I mean, it's not that bad, but technically that can be called doubling in, right? So the student is essentially homeless. So let's report a homeless record by going to student program, add the new record here, and Emerson. Okay. Education program code is homeless 191. Membership start date is, so he was determined homeless again when they started because that's the address. And then we don't need to populate these fields. The only fields you need to populate when you're reporting a 191 is the dwelling type and this unaccompanied youth indicator. How do we know that? Again, it's based on the CFS section. So if you go to the CFS field, go to student program, you should be able to determine what fields are required for homeless. So you have here, so let's just filter, type the word 191 for the code or just type homeless. That way you will know what specific fields requires a homeless record, right? All right, so homeless dwelling type is temporary doubled up. How do I know that? We go to the CalPADS code sets. So if you're new to CalPADS, you should have caught on right away that you need to have multiple documents to refer to, right? So it's not knowing the actual information, it's just knowing where the documents you could refer to. That's the secret to success in CalPADS reporting because of the nature of CalPADS, all of this data changes every year sometimes, and so you have to just know where to find the documents. Okay, so homeless, or what did the field say on the CFS here? So it says here, homeless dwelling type. On the code sets, look for homeless dwelling type. So I copy this. I just, type copy homeless. I go to the CalPADS code sets. I filter for under the code set homeless, and we have the homeless dwelling type. So it says here, temporary doubled up is if a temporary residence were a homeless family sharing the housing of other persons due to the loss of housing, economic hardships, or other similar reasons. So I guess you could potentially mark them as doubled up, right? Because they're essentially sharing a home right now, right? If the parent doesn't want to be reported as homeless, then that's fine too. But if they claim to be homeless, then report it based on that definition. Then unaccompanied youth indicator is a no because the student is with her parents. So we click on post. And then what else? Military and Air Force. Okay, so another program record you need to report is the Armed Forces record. So we click on Add New Record here. We go to Emerson. We go to Armed Forces Family Member and Membership Start Date. So for the membership start date for the Armed Forces family member, you have to remember two things. It's essentially you have to account for the earliest, for the date when the family member was hired in the Air Force. So now the question is, what if the member was hired before the student was born? Then the membership start date could be at the earliest the student's birth date, okay? Or the enrollment start date this year, right? So let's just use the birth date of the student, and let's see if the system would allow that, because I assume the system should allow that. 10/2/2018. And why would the system allow a date prior to the enrollment start date? That's because this is just an eligibility program. Okay, that's correct, Lori. Eligibility. If this is a program in CalPads coded as participating, then you will need to use the enrollment start date as the date. Or if it's an NSLP record, the earliest date you should use is the enrollment start date. Okay, okay. So we had the demographics in here. Okay, we have the student English language status, and hopefully we have the homeless program reported. All right, so we're just waiting for that other record to come up, right? The armed forces. So again, we forgot something earlier, and Brianna was kind enough to point that out. We mark the parent as one of the parents as SED instead of decline to state. Okay, so let's just mark an decline to state. And what does this mean? If one is SED and one is declined to state, will the student qualify for SED? That's right. Now you're getting the hang of it. Okay. So now we have those records in for these two students. So that essentially concludes the demo. It took us an hour and a half just for two students. It could have been just an hour, but thanks to me, I miss out on this guy's 2018 birthday. So, but again, it's bonus training for you guys. And besides, you guys want to hang out with us once in a while. So, so we have here the birth date for John Muir. We have the demographic information, the address, the language, and program, or Muir Woods, I mean. So now we have hopefully okay, there you go. Armed Forces was the birth date of the student, and then program is 9/11. All right, so that concludes our demo. So now that you have those records in CalPads, because you manually added the records in CalPads, what would be the next step for you? The next step is to make sure that each of the records you populated here matches what you have in your SIS. That way, whenever you now do an update throughout the year for a batch extract, it will always match the dates and match the different codes that we have in CalPads. Okay. So we have a question here. Can you show again how to see what students do not have parent ed level for both students? Okay, so You go to demographics, it should bring up this section here. Interesting, it brought up this section. What's happening? Okay, let's refresh that again. What time is it? 11:30? Okay, so you can look at the demographic information of the student, open this up, and this is where you would be able to see the parent ed level. Now, this is just for one student. How will you be able to find what data you missed uh, in a batch file? So you go to extracts, you go to ODS extracts, go to the student information, and then pick date range. Okay. You can do active student, but I always prefer date range. So enrollment start date, I pick, just for the heck of it, July 1st up to today. Okay. And then I request the file. So now what does this do? This will tell me if there are information, if you've reported the parent ed level for this year prior to the code rollover and you had a second parent name in there but no parent ed level because the field wasn't uh, in CalPADS yet, right? So this is how you investigate who are the parents that the second parent that you've reported that did not have the parent ed level. Again, I go to XRACs, ODS XRACs, SINF, and then student information, right? Yes, the eligibility record. So again, just because it's an eligibility record, that doesn't mean that you can use any date. There are specific programs that will allow you to use a date prior to the enrollment dates. So how do we know that? Uh, that that's a good question. You can go to the CalPADS data guide here. Okay, just download the data guide. And there is a table that provides you that information. Or you know what? I think I shared that. It's also here in the CalPADS user manual. Let's look at that. So we go to CalPADS user manual, online maintenance, and then look for student program details. Let's see if it is in this section. I guess not. So let's go to the CalPADS data guide. The CalPADS data guide will tell you what dates to use for each specific program code. Okay. So I think that's chapter 3, but
I'm listening to you, Kyron. Are you talking about the armed forces?
no, the we have here homeless and LA saying how come the homeless is eligibility, how come we're using the program start date. So still file here, Control F. So if you go to data groups, chapter, let's go to program. So chapter 2.1.3, if you go here, you'll notice that you have here, there's a matrix for what program start date to use. And if you need to update it. So refer to chapter 2.1.3 of the CalPADS data guide for guidance on the program start dates. Okay. And then we have another question. Sorry if this was answered, however, I had to step away during the parent. Okay. Historically, any student enrolled for the 23-24 academic year before 9/19/23 with missing ed level for P1 or P2 will not trigger an error. It will trigger. So Okay, so let's go back to the CalPADS file specifications because this is a helpful information. So let's go to CalPADS file specifications forms. Just reduce the and then filter for the parent ed level. Okay. So let's see here. So how do we filter? Let's go to the name, filter for parent. So you have here highest, 2, and okay. So at the minimum, you are required to report one parent level guardian, which obviously is the parent guardian 1. This is required if you have an enrollment equal to 10, 20, or 30, regardless if you have the parent's name in there or not. If it's a 10, 20, or 30, you have to populate the parent guardian highest level code all the time, regardless if you don't have if you have the parent's name under parent guardian 1 or not. Now, for parent guardian 2, this is only required if you reported the parent's name for the guardian 2 fields. Okay. If this is blank, if the parent name, parent last name for guardian 2 is blank, then the need for parent guardian 2 highest level is not required. But for parent guardian 1, it is always required as soon as the system sees that you have an enrollment status of 10, 20, or 30. Now, whether or not you have that information, if the student said decline to state or anything, it is required. Otherwise, if that's not populated, it will trigger a GER1, which is a missing value, a GER2, which is an invalid value, meaning if you have, so these are your triggers. Now, if in the data discrepancy, it would also again tell you that it will trigger once you have it on F1 or E3. So this one here will trigger only if one parent has the ed level, the second parent did not have the ed level. Oh, actually, they are changing it this year. So again, GER2, which is, what's GER2? Let's go back here. What is GER2? So let's go back to the known CalPADS. We go to help, troubleshooting to see the list of errors. So let's go, we'll need to have GER2 under program errors. Let's look at what GER2 states. Value not found in reference set. Okay, so if you're populating the incorrect value, so that's fatal. Okay, let's look for GER1 instead. GER1 is if the required field is missing. Okay, so it is required. GER1 will trigger for, let's go back to that, the parent ed level 1. It will trigger once it detects that your enrollment is 10, 20, or 30, and the parent ed level 1 is missing. Okay, so it is always required.